He had the badge, the ID, all the credentials, everything that proved he was legit. And yet, somehow, he was the one they treated like a criminal. It was a crisp Thursday morning, around 10:50 a.m., inside the hallowed halls of the City Central Library in Chicago, specifically its normally hushed research annex. This was a place dedicated to quiet contemplation. Rows of oak tables gleaming under soft lamplight. The gentle rustle of turning pages usually the loudest sound. People moved with a deliberate slowness, absorbed in their scholarly pursuits. Few paid much attention to anyone else. But today, something would shift that quiet. David Chun walked into the annex with a focused calm, the kind of demeanor that spoke of purpose. He wore a neatly pressed dark suit, a conservative tie, and carried a slim leather briefcase. His posture was upright, his gaze observant but not intrusive, simply taking in his surroundings as he made his way towards the designated waiting area near the main research desk. He gave a polite, almost imperceptible nod to the young woman behind the counter, who barely glanced up from her computer screen. David found a spot near a large potted fern, set down his briefcase, and pulled out a small, unassuming notebook. He began to make quiet observations, occasionally murmuring into a discreet earpiece, too low for anyone to discern the words. To a casual observer, he might have been a visiting academic preparing for a presentation or a researcher meticulously planning his day. But not everyone saw it that way. Behind the polished mahogany of the research desk, Brenda, a library assistant barely a year into her job, watched him. She prided herself on being observant, on keeping the annex secure and orderly. David's quiet intensity, his tailored suit that seemed a bit too formal for a typical library patron, the way he seemed to be scanning the room, it all began to knit together in her mind into a tapestry of suspicion. She leaned over to her colleague, a more seasoned librarian absorbed in cataloging. "See that guy over there?" Brenda whispered, nudging her head slightly. The older librarian looked up, gave David a cursory glance, and then a non-committal shrug before returning to her work. "Looks like he's waiting for someone," she murmured. Brenda wasn't satisfied. "He's been there for 10 minutes, just looking around, talking into that thing in his ear. It's just off." She didn't know David Chun, had never seen him before. She didn't consider walking over and asking if he needed assistance. Instead, the pieces she perceived, the suit, the earpiece, the quiet observation, clicked into a narrative of potential threat. She picked up the internal phone and dialed the library's head of security. "Hi, Mr. Henderson? It's Brenda at the research annex. There's an individual here. I'm not sure what his business is, but he's acting a bit suspiciously. Might be worth a look." She used those key words, acting suspiciously, and that was enough. Mr. Henderson, always cautious, said he'd send the campus police liaison officers to check it out. Standard procedure for anything that felt out of the ordinary. Upstairs, in the rare books collection, Dr. Eleanor Vance, the library's head archivist, was concluding an urgent call, completely unaware that her 11 a.m. appointment, Inspector David Chun, was about to become the subject of an entirely different kind of scrutiny. David, meanwhile, continued his quiet preparations, oblivious to the chain of events Brenda's call had set in motion, a call that was about to define the next crucial 8 minutes of his morning. The calm of the research annex was about to be broken. 2 uniformed campus police officers, Officer Miller and Officer Rodriguez, were already making their way from their small substation near the library's main entrance. The call had come through as a possible suspicious individual, research annex. Observer reports unusual behavior. Vague but enough to warrant a check. Miller was the senior of the 2, a man in his late 50s with a stern demeanor, known for taking every call with utmost seriousness, perhaps sometimes more than necessary. Rodriguez was younger, in her early 30s, generally more inclined to observe and assess before acting. "Suspicious individual, Annex?" Miller grunted as they walked. "Probably just some student lost in thought. But we check." Rodriguez nodded, her expression neutral. Could be anything or nothing. She made sure her body camera was active as they pushed open the glass doors to the research annex. Brenda saw them enter and a small, almost imperceptible flicker of vindication crossed her face. She watched, arms subtly folded, as they approached David. David was reviewing a document on a small tablet he'd taken from his briefcase when Officer Miller's voice cut through the quiet. "Sir, can we have a word with you for a moment?" David looked up, a flicker of surprise in his otherwise calm eyes. "Certainly, officers. Is there a problem?" Officer Miller's stance was firm. "We need you to step away from your briefcase, please, and keep your hands where we can see them." David blinked, not in panic, but clearly taken aback by the sudden formality and implied accusation. "I'm sorry, what is this about?" "We've had a report of suspicious activity, sir," Miller stated, his voice a little louder now, drawing a few curious glances from the other patrons. "I'm Inspector David Chun with the National Archives. I have an 11 o'clock appointment with Dr. Eleanor Vance." He made a slight, instinctive motion towards his inner jacket pocket. "Sir, I said don't reach for anything," Miller interjected sharply. David froze, his hand hovering. The quiet of the annex suddenly felt heavy, charged. "I was merely going to show you my credentials, officer," David said, his voice still even, but with a new note of firmness. Rodriguez stepped a little closer, her eyes assessing David, then glancing at Miller. "Can you place your briefcase on the floor and open it slowly, sir?" she asked, her tone more measured than Miller's. David complied, kneeling to place the briefcase flat, unzipping it carefully. "My identification and official letter of introduction are in the front compartment. You can retrieve them yourself if you prefer." Miller didn't move immediately, his jaw set. David remained still, patient. "As I said, I'm here for a scheduled audit of sensitive materials with Dr. Vance. You can contact her office to confirm." Rodriguez gestured for him to proceed. David slowly reached into the compartment and retrieved a leather ID wallet and a sealed envelope. He offered them to Rodriguez. She took them, opened the wallet. Photo ID, official badge, credentials. Everything looked legitimate. She glanced at the letterhead on the envelope.
National Archive Inspector.
She read quietly, then looked at Miller. "Seems to check out." Miller, however, wasn't ready to de-escalate. "We still need to verify this independently. Who is Dr. Vance?" "She's the head archivist for the City Central Library," David replied. "Her office is on the 3rd floor, Special Collections." He glanced at his watch. It had been about 8 minutes since they first approached him. 8 minutes of being treated like a potential threat in a place he was visiting in an official capacity. The initial surprise had faded, replaced by a weary resignation he knew all too well. He just hoped Dr. Vance wouldn't be much longer. Officer Miller still seemed unconvinced, or perhaps, having escalated the situation, he was unsure how to gracefully step back. "Sir, we're going to ask you to accompany us to the security office while we verify your credentials and your appointment," Miller stated, his tone leaving little room for discussion. David sighed internally but kept his expression neutral. "Officer, that really isn't necessary. My credentials are valid, and Dr. Vance is expecting me. If you just call her office, or even the main National Archives liaison number, this could be cleared up in moments." Rodriguez looked from Miller to David, a hint of unease on her face. She had reviewed the ID, it looked impeccable. The letter on official government letterhead also seemed authentic. "Maybe we could just use our radio to call dispatch and have them contact Dr. Vance's office?" she suggested quietly to Miller. Miller scowled slightly, perhaps feeling his authority being subtly questioned by his junior partner, or just irked by David's calm persistence. Standard procedure for unconfirmed individuals in sensitive areas is to verify at the security office. Less disruption here. Just as Miller was about to insist further, the doors to the research annex opened again, and a woman hurried in, looking slightly flustered, her eyes scanning the room. It was Dr. Eleanor Vance, a woman in her late 60s with a sharp, intelligent face, clutching a file. "David, Inspector Chun, I am so terribly sorry," she called out as she spotted him with the officers, her voice carrying a note of surprise and concern as she neared. "My apologies for running late. My previous meeting ran over. Officers, is there some sort of problem here?" Miller and Rodriguez turned, David offered a small, polite nod to Dr. Vance. Dr. Vance, good morning. Officer Miller cleared his throat. Ma'am, we received a report about this gentleman, and we were just verifying his identity and purpose here. Dr. Vance's eyebrows shot up. Verifying his identity? This is Inspector David Chen from the National Archives. We have a scheduled, high-level sensitive materials audit today. My office confirmed his visit weeks ago with library administration and security. She looked from the officers to David, a frown deepening on her face. Surely there hasn't been a misunderstanding? Rodriguez held up David's credentials. He provided these, ma'am. We were in the process of confirming. But it was Dr. Vance's next words, directed at Officer Miller, that landed with unexpected force. She peered at him more closely. Officer Miller, isn't it? I believe I recognize you. Weren't you at the interdepartmental liaison training we hosted last month? The one specifically covering protocols for engaging with visiting federal and state officials conducting official business on city premises. Miller's already stern face seemed to lose a shade of color. He blinked, clearly caught off guard. Yes, ma'am. I believe I was. Dr. Vance's tone, while still professional, now carried an edge of distinct disapproval. Indeed, and if I recall correctly, Inspector Chen's own department, the National Archives Oversight Division, actually conducted a significant portion of that training, focusing on proper identification verification and de-escalation techniques for precisely these kinds of official visits. The silence in that small section of the annex was suddenly profound. David Chun simply stood there, his expression unreadable, watching Officer Miller. Brenda, from behind the desk, looked like she wished the floor would open up and swallow her. The shocking twist wasn't just that David was legitimate, but that the officer challenging him had, in theory, been trained by David's own agency on how not to handle this very situation. Officer Miller swallowed, his gaze shifting uncomfortably from Dr. Vance to Inspector Chun, then briefly to the floor. He seemed to be struggling for words. Well, ma'am, we have to take all reports seriously. The initial information was vague. Dr. Vance's expression didn't soften. Vague information, officer, is precisely why your training emphasizes direct inquiry and professional verification, not immediate escalation based on assumptions. Inspector Chen's credentials, which Officer Rodriguez is holding, are clear and unambiguous. She turned to David. Inspector, I am profoundly sorry for this reception. This is not how the City Central Library conducts itself with official visitors. David inclined his head slightly. Thank you, Dr. Vance. These things happen. His voice was calm, devoid of anger, but there was an undeniable weight to his words. He looked at Officer Miller. The training officer covered the importance of recognizing official federal identification and the protocols for discrete verification, especially in public-facing institutions. The goal is to ensure security without causing undue alarm or offense to legitimate representatives. Miller finally found his voice, though it was subdued. Yes, sir. I recall. Officer Rodriguez, who had been quiet but observant throughout the exchange, spoke up. Inspector Chun, Dr. Vance, my apologies for the disturbance. We were following up on a call. David looked at Rodriguez, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. Understanding protocols is one thing, officer. Applying them with discernment is another. Your colleague seemed to overlook several key steps. Brenda, from her post, looked miserable. She hadn't anticipated this outcome. She had expected to be thanked for her vigilance, not to be the indirect cause of such an embarrassing confrontation for the library and its security. Dr. Vance sighed. Well, I trust this matter is now resolved, officers? Inspector Chun and I have a significant amount of work to get through. Miller nodded curtly. Yes, ma'am. Apologies again for the inconvenience, Inspector. He and Rodriguez turned to leave. As they walked away, David saw Rodriguez glance back, a thoughtful, almost troubled look on her face. Dr. Vance led David towards the secure section of the archives. I cannot apologize enough, David, she said once they were out of earshot of the main annex. Completely unacceptable. David managed a small smile. Eleanor, it's not the first time, and likely won't be the last. The important thing is how these moments are used. Perhaps a refresher for Officer Miller is in order. Dr. Vance nodded grimly. Consider it done. And a word with young Brenda at the desk too, about judgment versus responsible inquiry. Later that afternoon, as David was concluding his initial review, Officer Rodriguez found a moment to approach him in a quiet corridor. Inspector Chan? David looked up. Yes, officer? She hesitated for a moment. I just wanted to say, personally, I'm sorry about what happened this morning. You were entirely professional and well, Officer Miller, could have handled it better. The training Dr. Vance mentioned, I was there too. It was very clear. David studied her for a moment. Thank you, Officer Rodriguez. Recognizing a misstep is the first step towards ensuring it doesn't happen again. It's easy to react, harder to reflect and respond appropriately. I'll remember that, she said. I hope Officer Miller does too. David nodded. We all have our biases, conscious or not. The challenge is not to let them dictate our actions, especially when we're in positions of authority. He then added, the real test isn't in spotting the obvious threat, but in discerning truth from assumption, even when it's uncomfortable. She nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face, then excused herself. The day's audit continued, professional and focused, but the morning's events lingered in the air. It wasn't about shouting or arrests. It was about the quiet erosion of trust that happens when assumptions override facts. It was about the 8 minutes that could have derailed an important task, all because of a look, a feeling, a failure to simply ask. Stories like this, they don't always end with dramatic confrontations. Sometimes they end in quiet apologies, in renewed commitments to do better, in the uncomfortable realization that even with training, human judgment can be flawed. But if we don't talk about these moments, if we don't analyze where things went wrong, how do we expect to improve? How do we ensure that the next person, in the next mundane lobby or quiet library, isn't judged before they're heard? If this made you think, even for a second, about how we see each other, how we react, then perhaps sharing it can start a conversation. Because silence in the face of misunderstanding helps no one.